In steamy southern Florida, even in the city, life is everywhere. Here in Miami, a couple of unassuming lizards could teach us some big lessons about animal communication, competition, and maybe how biological invasions happen. Neil Losin is an evolutionary biologist based at UCLA, studying how fighting between species can influence their evolution. And few animals fight more than the lizards that Neil has come to Miami to study, the anoles.
Anoles are a really diverse group of lizards. There are almost 400 species, and they're found all over the New World tropics. And because of all this diversity, biologists have been studying anoles for decades.
On each island of the Greater Antilles, anole species seem to fit into a consistent set of body sizes, shapes, and habitat preferences. These forms are called ecomorphs, and they're named for the habitats they prefer: trunk ground, grass bush, trunk, and so on. The same ecomorphs appear on all 4 islands, but each one is represented by different species on each island. Amazingly, the ecomorphs evolved independently on each island. Given a similar set of environmental challenges, a similar set of species evolved to meet those challenges. With so many anoles in the Caribbean, you might be wondering why Neil conducts his research in Florida.
Florida only has one native anole species, the green anole. It's a beautiful little lizard, and it's common in suburban backyards and in more natural habitats throughout the state. Local people call it the chameleon for its ability to change color, but anoles are not closely related to the true chameleons of Africa and Madagascar. South Florida is pretty unique in the United States. Many of its animals and plants belong to groups that are more common in the tropics. And because of its mild climate and a thriving exotic pet trade, Florida has also become a haven for invasive species. Birds, reptiles, and amphibians have been introduced from all over the world, and many of them compete with native species. Anoles are no exception. In the last century, at least 8 species from the Caribbean have shown up alongside the native green anole in Florida. And in natural communities, you rarely find 2 species of the same ecomorph living together, because they tend to compete for the same habitat and resources. But in Florida, most of the anoles were introduced accidentally, regardless of their ecomorph. So we can use this man-made community to study interactions between competing species.
In South Miami, the native green anole shares the landscape with a trunk ecomorph, the bark anole from Hispaniola, a crown giant, the night anole from Cuba, and 2 trunk ground anoles, the brown anole of Cuba and the crested anole of Puerto Rico. These 5 species can all be found side by side in parks and gardens. Anoles are often seen doing push-ups and showing off their brightly colored throat skin, or dewlap. But why do they draw attention to themselves like this? After all, anoles make tasty snacks for snakes, birds, and even other anoles.
Male anoles use push-ups and dewlap displays to attract females and to defend territories against rival males. And in fact, many lizard species use similar displays for the same purposes. The males that sire the most offspring also pass the most genes to the next generation, so performing these conspicuous displays is worth the risk.
When 2 males can't sort out their differences by displaying, they fight. After throwing his opponent out of the tree, the winner advertises his victory and his ownership of the territory with more displays. Neil's research focuses on the two trunk ground anoles, the Cuban brown anole and the Puerto Rican crested anole. Because these species belong to the same ecomorph, they might be competing for the same resources. Both species are recent arrivals in Florida. While the native green anole has lived in North America for 6 million years or more, the brown anole arrived about a century ago and has spread throughout Florida, while the crested anole arrived in the 1970s and is only established in Miami.
I want to know whether the interactions between these species where they meet in Florida are affecting their evolution. If so, I would expect to see differences between individuals that live alongside the other species and individuals that don't. And one way they could differ is in their aggressiveness toward the other species.
Brown anoles were perfect for testing this idea. Since the crested anole has a small range in South Miami, brown anoles can easily be found both inside the crested anole's range and outside its range. To evaluate males' responses to each species, Neil would present male intruders into wild brown anoles territories and observe these territorial males' responses. He began by capturing male brown anoles. These would be his resident males. He measured them, marked them so he could relocate them later, and re-released them on their territories. Then he captured brown and crested anoles from other populations to use as his intruders. Before a male became an intruder, Neil fit the male with a harness so it could be retrieved at the end of the experiment.
I used a fishing pole to place the tethered males into residence territories, and I got a lot of confused looks from joggers and dog walkers who had to be wondering, what on earth is this guy doing fishing in the middle of the forest?
Neil presented each resident with one intruder of its own species and one crested anole, and he recorded the residents' reaction to each intrusion.
The data from this experiment show that brown anoles living in areas with no crested anoles displayed just as intensely toward crested anole intruders as they did toward their own species. But brown anoles living alongside crested anoles were more discriminating. They were more aggressive toward members of their own species. I suspect that this difference in behavior among brown anole populations might occur because crested anoles are bigger than brown anoles. So a brown anole living alongside crested anoles might know, in some sense, that fighting with crested anoles is a bad idea.
Next, Neil wants to try a similar experiment with crested anoles as the residents. He also wants to know whether the behavioral differences he observed between brown anole populations are caused by learning or by genetic differences.
What's exciting to me about this research is not just what I'm learning about these particular lizards, but also what these species can tell us more generally about the evolutionary process. That's what I love about studying evolution. There's a ton of diversity out there in nature, in animals' size, shape, color, behavior, but a lot of that diversity can be explained with a few relatively simple principles. And it's that search for the underlying rules of evolution that made me become an evolutionary biologist and that motivates me to keep learning more.